What's up, MMA fans on YouTube? I'm back to doing MMA vids. Thanks for sticking with me on my little hiatus, but here gonna do a little recap of UFC 73 Stacked. It was a much anticipated card, a lot of fanfare, a lot of pub, a lot of hype into this card, all the great matchups. On paper it looked like a great card, but we've seen that time and time again where things on paper don't necessarily translate to a productive night of entertaining fights. But I myself found the card very entertaining. A lot of people differ on that issue, but we'll talk about it in this segment. So here we go. The first fight of the night. The irony in this fight was very thick for me. The first Pride heavyweight title fight in Pride history taking place in an octagon, just in a UFC setting. Antonio Rodrigo Nogueira against Heath Herring. And Nogueira, to me, I don't know if anybody else noticed it, looked a little out of shape in this fight. He was carrying a little bit of a middle. I've never seen him look like that before. Going into a fight, weighed in about 140, usually goes into his fights around 225, 226, 230, somewhere in that area. Never seen him go into a fight so heavy. But nevertheless, in with Texas Crazy Horse Heath Herring. It was a fight that I felt was won by Nogueira in the fact that he just was really pushing the action, was really pushing the pace. His stand-up was much crisper. He was landing 1-2 combinations at will, had a nice straight left jab. His attack was just a little more varied with the takedowns and the transitions on the ground, even though he was swept a few times, was reversed in guard by Herring. And the first round, of course, was capped off by that huge head kick that Herring landed, and anybody who's ever followed Nogueira's career has never seen him that rattled before. He was out cold, period. Maybe some refs would have stopped the fight. This one in particular let the fight go. I was kind of shocked because Nogueira was out. Herring rushed in, then immediately backed out. Many people felt like this was the catalyst for Herring to lose the fight. I felt that in the following 2 rounds he just didn't push the pace. Was backing up most of the time, and you just don't win mixed martial arts fights by backing up. Herring loses a unanimous decision victory to Nogueira. Obviously Nogueira now is going to go on to face a big name in the UFC in the heavyweight division, maybe a Tim Sylvia, maybe an Andrei Arlovsky, somebody along those lines. Maybe, who knows? We'll see what happens, but it should be interesting to see who they pit him against in his next UFC fight. Now on to the next fight we got to see, which was the lightweight championship fight. Sean the Muscle Shark against Hermes Franca. A lot of people were torn on this fight, feeling Franca would catch him in something. Others, Shark's wrestling, his pressure, the pace that he pushes, just too much. He's a Matt Hughes, Randy Couture style fighter in the lightweight division. Just his wrestling is just too impeccable, just too much for most guys to handle, and it proved to be that in this fight. Obviously the theme of the fight was Franca landing the big knee or catching Shirk in a guillotine, but nothing ever came to fruition. Shirk was rattled. I think it was on the second or third knee, and he was out, but immediately snapped back to consciousness and took Franca down. That was the theme of the fight. Shirk shooting in, Franca unable to defend, and when on the ground, his passing, his work on the ground was incredible. Just constantly putting Franca in his element, not allowing for any rest. Franca did look gassed at the mid-third, end of the fourth, and into the fifth. Kind of seemed to concede the loss. Wasn't able to do much of anything in that time frame, or for really most of the fight, other than the knee and a few of the guillotine attempts. You could just tell that most of the people who were there and booing the fight, and those who complained thereafter, don't mean to try to pull rank or say anything. They're not true mixed martial arts fans. Those are the new fans who are just enamored with the stand-up brawls and the wars. But if you truly appreciate mixed martial arts, you appreciated a fight like this, appreciate what was going on the ground, understood what Shirk was trying to do, what positions he was trying to put himself in to win the fight, his wrestling. And that's an element of MMA. the takedowns, the wrestling, the advancing the position. Franca being a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, not being able to keep Shirk in his guard much. But I felt like Shirk was could have done a little more in terms of his ground and pound. Could have landed some more elbows, could have landed some more punches. Another thing I'm going to bring up in this is, I don't know if many of you have ever seen Shirk's one fight in Pride. It was at Bushido 2, and when, of course, in Pride, the knees were allowed on the ground, and the 4-point attacks, and then the side control and stuff, and I can only imagine how much improved and how much more of an exciting fight all mixed martial arts fights would be, but let alone guys like Hughes, Shirk, Couture, if they were allowed to use the knees on the ground. I mean, if they have a guy north-south or somewhere in that position, that guy's just not going to lay there and wait for a stand-up or try to tie him up. He's going to move, because when there's a threat of a big bone like a knee coming at your head multiple times, you might take one, maybe knocks you out, but nevertheless, big win for Shirk. Would love to see the knees allowed on the ground. Would improve a fight like that. Maybe it stops a fight like that, but hopefully we'll see. A lot of rules are up for debate now in MMA. On to the next fight we got to see, which was the much anticipated fight of this card, much hyped for such hype card, was Tito Ortiz versus Rashad Evans. Also, a lot of people torn on this fight. People felt either Rashad was gonna crush Tito, because anytime Tito faces a wrestler at or around his level, he folds, loses, a la Randy Couture. But Rashad's not at Randy Couture's level, I believe, with his MMA wrestling. And Tito felt that Tito's fans felt, the Tito backers felt like, that the pressure, the bright lights, the fact that Tito's been in this position so many times would play a huge factor in this fight. And it kind of did. Rashad really didn't commit to anything. He was kind of content to standing, circling around on the outside, pulling, just waving his hands, really flurried a few times. I felt Tito's stand-up was much crisper, more varied with the kicks and the combinations, looked sharp. Nevertheless, Tito did get the one big takedown in the first, easily won the first, but then, of course, story of the fight, Tito grabbing the fence, cost him a big point. If anything, Tito wins the fight. If he doesn't do that, Rashad won the third, maybe just by activity with a takedown in the last few seconds, but wasn't able to do anything. And I could live with a draw in this fight. We haven't seen a draw in a long time in mixed martial arts. I don't really agree with draws. I don't think MMA is set up for draws. That's what boxing is there for. That's why there's even rounds most of the time. Well, in championship fights there's 12 rounds, and other fights there's 10. But I just don't agree with draws. I feel like they should go to a sudden death round if that's the case on a scorecard. But we'll see this fight again in Ohio. I believe it's UFC 77. So hopefully we'll get a winner in that fight. On to the next fight we got to see, and it was kind of weird. I think they felt like they were pressed for time because the prior two fights had gone to decision, so they needed to fit this middleweight championship fight in. Nate Marquardt against Anderson Silva, and also people split down the middle for this fight, and many feeling like Nate had the kryptonite to finally penetrate Silva's seemingly impenetrable armor that he has over him now. Just his striking is just so fluid, so crisp, effortless striking. It just, everything he does just looks effortless. And onto Nate's game, everybody felt like his ground game and his ability to move on the ground and his stand-up would really counterbalance everything that Silva could throw at him. But nevertheless, the fighters come out, some circling. Nate seems to be pawing at Anderson's lead hands. I don't know why. Anderson gets tired of that, throws a big flying knee, doesn't quite land it flush, but lands a little bit of it. And Nate, grabbing onto the knee, was just holding on, eventually gets a takedown from that, stays in Silva's guard for a little while. They get stood up. Again, some more circling. Anderson throws a huge straight left, finds his range. That definitely rocks Nate because he shoots in for a takedown right away after that. Anderson does a cool reversal and then foot sweeps Marquardt and doesn't go right into Marquardt's guard, kind of just hover over it and just stacks him up and just starts landing the big punches. The one that hit Marquardt in the face and snapped his head onto the octagon. I felt like the one that put him away. He immediately rolled over, turtled up, and that's when the fight was stopped. It was a good stoppage. Marquardt was laying on his back for 2-3+ minutes after that. And Anderson proves once again why he's the middleweight champion. Dominant performance, going on to face Rich Franklin now in a rematch from UFC 64 is going to be interesting to see how Rich tries to put the pieces of the puzzle back together against Silva, what kind of game plan he comes in with. Hopefully, he comes in, puts on a better performance. I think he will. The one X factor, if he does get put in the clinch, is he going to freeze up and kind of panic and just sort of again lose the fight in that same instance that he did in the first fight. So should be interesting to see what happens in that rematch. So if anything, this card spawns some interesting rematches. But on to the next fight, which was supposed to be the swing bout, but Kenny Florian against Alvin Robinson. And Kenny, he just continues to look impressive each and every time that we see him. Even in the loss to Shirk, how can you not be impressed? Going the 5 rounds, taking the amount of abuse that he took onto Mishima, was almost caught in a submission there. Eventually, gets Mishima in a submission, submits him. His stand-up looked good in that fight, and onto this fight, the same. His wrestling, his ground and pound, his conditioning looked great, and Florian looks like he looks like he's a gatekeeper in that 155 division. Anybody he fights is going to have a hard time against him. Whether he fights, I'd love to see a fight like Spencer Fisher, a stand-up guy versus a ground guy with some improving stand-up, something along those lines. But anytime Florian, anybody he fights, it's going to be in for a hard fight, because he just looks like a guy who's taken he just continuing to improve each and every time. And that was about it for that card. Hope everybody enjoyed it. A lot of interesting matchups and a lot of interesting cards we see being put together now. We know now that Chuck Liddell is going to be back in the octagon in September against potentially Keith Jardine. Supposedly it was Anderson Silva, but like I said, with guys like Anderson and Wanderlei Silva and Fedor, guys along those lines, you just kind of, until you see an official announcement by the UFC, or you go as far as to actually see them walking into the octagon for the fight itself, I don't really believe rumors about those guys, because they're just so highly touted and they're such big names. But we do know definitely that Shogun's going to be in the octagon finally against Machida. Talk about not throwing him in with a cupcake. That should be a great fight. That should be an amazing fight. I think it's going to be one of the hardest tests of Shogun's career, and obviously the hardest test of Machida's career. So that two young guns going at it, that should be an awesome fight. And a lot of great cards coming up for the UFC. Hopefully they get some of the other guys on board, like Fedor and Wanderlei. We finally see the matchups that they present to the UFC happen. So again, thanks to all the subscribers for sticking with me. Hope you enjoyed this segment, and until then, you guys have a good one. Take care. I'm going to be doing 74 predictions coming up real soon. Couture, Gonzaga, GSP, Koscheck. That should be an interesting card. Of course, Couture going to be the overwhelming fan favorite in that fight, and hard to go against them. But Gonzaga, of course, everybody is in love with the head kick knockout over Krokop, so he seems like a hot guy right now. But see what happens under the bright lights, the big title fight, and anything could happen. But nevertheless, until then, you guys have a good one and take care.